Bless you, Colin.
Thank you.
We are meeting now, streaming live on Facebook. Thank you, Jamie Lowell. Welcome.
I'll be back.
Thank you. Welcome to this very special Friday edition of Jazz Cabbage Cafe, everybody. I'm Rick Thompson, your host, here with Mike Brennan and Colin McDougall, and Jamie Lowell will be joining us a little bit later. Today, we are discussing the MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity and Reinvestment and something else Act. So it's Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act is what I meant to say. Now the MORE Act just passed the House of Representatives today. Welcome Brad Forrester, who's joining us as well. The MORE Act just passed the House of Representatives today. It's been introduced for quite some time. There's a Senate version of it also introduced, which is not getting any rhythm in that House. The important thing, though, is that this is one of the very first steps that's necessary in order for us to create federal cannabis law reform, and it's a big one. So this is the biggest vote cannabis has ever had in the federal Constitution.
It's sort of symbolic in the sense that everybody
knows Jazz Cabbage Cafe show
that nothing's going to happen in the lame duck. I mean, other than this, the Senate's not going to pick it up, and then once the lame duck is over, essentially the Congress is over and it dies, and you got to do it all over again. But you got to start somewhere, right?
Definitely. And it's symbolic also that the House of Representatives is like the House of the people, and that it was passed through there, and it's also a bipartisan bill, so that's pretty cool too.
Sort of bipartisan. I think, Rick, you said there was 5 Republicans who voted for it.
Yeah, although it's bipartisan in sponsorship, as far as voting goes, not so much. The voting along party lines, with only 6 Democrats voting against, 5 Democrats voting against, and 6 Republicans voting for.
Wow.
I think you got it backwards.
Close enough. Close enough for this kind of work, though, right? Okay, but the point being is, it's pretty much a Democratic thing, and then some Republicans.
Yep. That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So very significant, but
also I think Justin Amash, he's an independent. He voted for it as well.
But he's leaving. He's didn't get reelected, so.
Yeah.
But again, it's a symbolic vote, but you got to start somewhere, and now it all turns to what happens in Georgia, as we all know. If those 2 Democrat senators win, and then Kamala Harris has the deciding vote, and then lots of things can change. But that's going to go.
Let's put this all into perspective, though, because the whole thing about Georgia is only effective for the 2021-2022 legislative session.
Yes, good point.
So the MORE Act itself is going to die at the end of this year without a vote in the Senate. It'll have to be reintroduced next year in the House. It'll have to pass the House and then get to the Senate in order to do that. Yes. Now, the good news is that, it does seem like there's some bipartisan support. So even if we don't have all of the Democrats on board in the Senate, we might be able to get a couple of Republicans to come over and say yes to this particular program. If it does pass both houses of the Congress next year, I doubt Joe Biden doesn't sign it. I think for sure he signs it because it would be so politically unpopular for him not to. Brad, we haven't heard from you yet. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Hey, thank you, gentlemen. It's nice to be here.
One of the
I'm just kind of getting settled in. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rick.
No, we're doing great. And in fact, there's a lot of issues with some of the things that the MORE Act actually says. We've talked about the MORE Act as a symbolic gesture, as a movement towards cannabis law reform. And I think in that respect, it's undeniable its significance. However, as a piece of legislation, it doesn't really reflect what most rank and file cannabis users across the United States would prefer to see in a federal program. First of all, it levies some taxes on people. Second of all, it requires federal registration. Third of all, it also discriminates against people who've had cannabis felonies or cannabis convictions in the past. And I don't think this is the ideal vehicle that we wanted to be able to assist people of color who have lived in communities that have been disproportionately affected over the years by the war on drugs. So again, just like oftentimes in Michigan, some of the legislation we get is a good move forward, just not the ideal snowman we would create if we had our own front yard.
I like that. Good analogy. But how how open do you think the Democrats are going to be next year to trying to tinker with it, or is this pretty much the form it's going to be in?
Well, if we get decriminalization, total deschedule from the schedule of controlled substances, that will still be a good base to build around. I think that's far preferable to what Joe Biden's representative said earlier today. Biden's representative
You
Biden's
there?
represent. Yep, I am. Biden's representative said earlier today that Joe favored a Schedule 2 status for cannabis so that it could continue to be studied for both the positive and negative effects cannabis has on the human body.
Mhm.
Now, first of all, what we've learned from legalization across all the states in the United States is that we don't need no stinking science to be our starter's gun for legalization and for cannabis law reform. We're reforming cannabis laws not because of medical purpose any longer, but because of personal freedoms and social justice. So when someone says, wait, we can't go fast, we got to slow down because we got to study in science and medicine, we're past that. So for a federal government to say we still need to hold on to the fetters of the drug war and then use drug war rhetoric as reasons for it, that doesn't sound like a progressive Washington, D.C. to me.
But as we discussed in an earlier interview you and I did, Kamala Harris is on board, and I watched that CNN interview with the two of them Thursday night, and apparently what Biden does is the last person he talks to is Kamala, just bounce it off whatever he's doing off her, which is what you're supposed to do, right? President, vice president, and so who knows? I mean, she could like turn him around and tell him, well, this is a good starting point, but so
Well, with the MORE Act, the Senate version of the MORE Act, it has a House version which passed today, and then a Senate version which has not been brought up for a hearing yet in its own committee. That Senate version she sponsored, so she's on board with the whole remove it from the schedule of controlled substances, which was the Bernie Sanders plan. So as far as that goes, having her in a position of large influence is just great for us. Much better than if she was not vice president and someone else was. I know there's been a lot of negativity surrounding Kamala Harris because of her time in California as a federal prosecutor, or as the state's attorney general, rather. And anytime someone was involved in the drug war, we should be suspicious of their current motives because of their past behavior. But when I look at the legislation she sponsored regarding cannabis law reform, it seems like there's way too much depth there for it to be just a cover story. Brad Forrester, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out uh, if all the Democrats are going to be on board. Let's say that the two Georgia Senate seats are captured by the Democrats. Are we 100% certain that they would toe the line? I mean, I think some of the stuff that we saw in the MORE Act, for example, the provision that's making everybody unhappy, that's excluding previous cannabis felons from participating. Uh, you know, I I think that is something that was put in there perhaps to attract some reluctant Democrats, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because it didn't seem to attract many Republicans. Uh,
I read a
am I
CNN
reading it
article.
wrong?
Nope, you're right. I read a CNN article that said that was just added in the last few days. So the MORE Act went through months and months and months of sitting there with no amendments, and then that was amended to add on, obviously to get some of those pro law enforcement votes in the House of Representatives. Hopefully in 2021 we'll have an opportunity to have some input over that and point out to people how ridiculous it is to say we want to redress the grievances of the war on drugs, but if you got caught up in the war on drugs, tough shit for you. So that's a contradictory statement. That's a mixed message, and I'm sure that when calmer heads have an opportunity to get an audience with the important people, that'll be pointed out. Now, whether they change it or not is a different question completely.
Well, Biden, if you look at his history, had never been a particularly supporter of this, right? But now I think he'll change. He's changed a lot on a lot of things, his points of view. And with her right there next to him all the time, I think that she may kind of mellow him out a bit and things will change.
I think that this is the part where we say it's kind of a drag to have a 70-plus-year-old man as the president of the United States, because he's had 30 or 40 years of drug warrior training, especially in the Congress, where it was drilled into their heads that we need to satisfy law enforcement and the feds and the DEA. These are trusted sources, and we have to believe what they say. Now, we have the benefit of hindsight to be able to look back and say that those were jaundiced opinions, that was false facts that were being presented, and there really was nothing to be afraid of. It was manufactured fear. But Biden still seems to be in that mode a little bit. Plus, let's not discount the fact that the law enforcement, police, prison,
Well, yeah, it's a private enterprise. Everybody's on the take on that one. Everybody's making money.
well, and we know that
The judges, the lawyers, the courts, you name it, all the way up and down the line. So
maintaining cannabis's illegality does benefit people to a certain degree, and switching it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 allows people like GW Pharma to have more exclusivity when it comes to distribution of product in the United States. And I think, again, we're well past that. We have people making in their basements product that in my opinion, sometimes is superior to what GW Pharma is putting out. But even if it was inferior product, the fact is we've got people doing it all across the United States of America. There's no way the federal government is going to put that genie back in the bottle. So just going to Schedule 2, that's not a satisfactory solution. Complete descheduling, the Kamala Harris and the Bernie Sanders plan, that's the right way to go. What that does is it allow each individual states to continue to regulate the way that they're regulating. And I think, importantly, it knocks down those barriers to interstate travel. I mean, am I wrong when I say that? Wouldn't we agree that removal from Schedule 1 would make it possible for us to take cannabis across state lines now?
Yeah, it needs to be removed totally from the schedule. And I don't think there's any like good way around that. Even like moving into like Schedule 4 or 5. It was never like meant to like be on there. Like I know before on a Jazz Cabbage Cafe episode, we had John Sinclair on it, and he always advocated that for some reason Nixon put it on like way back when, Schedule 1, no medical value, and it was just kind of like forgotten on there. And I just feel that our program here and like just people across the nation and how hard they've worked to like decriminalize cannabis in their own states, medically and recreationally, and CBD and in whatever form, it would just be too hard to like put it all back in.
Yep, I think that's true. I think the other thing is trying to have a federal policy which overrules all these individual states is a loser situation. You're likely to get sued, and people are going to just not obey it anyway. I think one that is permissive to individual states having freedom, that's the one that works. And that's what we're talking about when we remove it from the schedule of controlled substances. Just switching it to Schedule 2, that doesn't really accomplish the goal. That's fascia. That's just superficial change. And we're looking for lasting, durable, meaningful change. And popping people out of jail is a part of it. The MORE Act, the E in MORE, is expungement. If you're tepid in the way that you approach expungement, it can be a non-functional, superficial gift. We really want it to be something that has teeth, something that really goes into the areas where Michigan's cannabis expungement bills did not go. Let's emancipate people for production, for sales, for transfer. Let's make sure that we wipe out those records automatically, and we don't put people through a big, long process that costs them a lot of money and requires attorneys.
Well, that was certainly one of the shortcomings of the MORE Act. I mean, it would expunge the records of federal felons, but it still wouldn't enable them to be a participant in the licensing process. Right. It was kind of contradictory in that sense.
Yeah, and that's not the only way in which the MORE Act seems to be contradictory. Again, we like to praise the fact that it's a step forward, but as we start to look at the nuts and bolts of this, and we really have to, as an advocate, you can't just say, I like it because it seems like it's going to help my people. You really have to look at the nuts and bolts of proposed law, because that's where all the details are, is in the devil's. So you've got to look at it from a perspective of, does it help the people that it says it's helping? And in some cases, yes, but in some cases, no. And this proposed tax, I've seen
I'm not
5%,
unmuting.
and I've seen 8% also. So I've seen two different percentages. But when you collect a tax and it's going to go towards retraining of felons that were not involved in cannabis crimes, I mean, I support that move, but I'm just not sure that that's the right place for us to be putting that money. We should be helping people like veterans and felons and African Americans and people from disproportionately affected communities getting business licenses, being able to help out, instead of providing job
Well,
training for other people.
we should follow the concept of decriminalization, and that is sending it back to the states, letting them decide the policy. I know that that's not going to make a lot of people happy in some senses, because it may still be illegal for me to carry cannabis from Michigan to Ohio or Indiana. But certainly I think that would be a tremendous step that even conservatives could probably live with at the end of the day.
So let me just do a real quick roll call here, because we've been joined by folks. We got Colin McDougall from Criminalized Nature Ann Arbor and from Jazz Cabbage Cafe, Mike Brennan from the iHemp broadcast and 420 Post and many other things too. Brad Forrester is here. He's on the board of directors of Michigan NORML and has been active for a very, very long time. Jamie Lowell's just rejoined us. Jamie, of course, Jazz Cabbage Cafe and the Botanical Company and many, many other things he does, including the Cannabis Caucus. And also joined by Ryan Basor from Redemption Cannabis. Ryan, just before by the way, that's an NLG sign I see you holding out there. That's nice.
North Lansing Growers.
Yep. So we were just talking about how the MORE Act is contradictory, Ryan, when it says it wants to help emancipate the records of people who've had federal cannabis crimes, but yet disallows them from participating in cannabis businesses. Talk about that.
It's just a kicking, the same old. We've been used to that. You get a bill going, you like it, it's going, and some asshole at the end put something in it. It's just same old. I'm a little disgusted, to be honest with you, with it. So, it could have been such a beautiful thing. Obviously it's still symbolic, but come on, like what are we doing still?
Well, Ryan, a couple of us had a little chat session on Facebook earlier, and it was suggested that this was a very well planned attack by the Democrats in order to gin up support for the Georgia runoff election.
Oh yeah.
You think there's a validity to that?
I think there is, without a doubt. A way to get turnout. I think been seeing. I don't follow a lot of non-marijuana politics, but this has become marijuana politics, and there's people worried about obviously Trump saying that the election's no good and don't go out, or what's the point of voting? Is that going to hurt turnout? And then you got that along with now possibly, hey, a lot of Georgians find out, hey, if you vote, we're going to have legal marijuana. Like that. You see what it does in Michigan and other states. I mean, it's pretty damn smart.
I've lived in Florida twice, in Tennessee once, when in my newspaper career, and everybody I knew in both places smoked all the time. So I'm sure that's pretty much the situation in Georgia. The Southerners really do smoke a lot. So.
In terms of this being a strategy by the Dems in order to help that out, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it might be opportunistically may have landed in that zone, but certainly not an original strategy or something that was well crafted, as might be suspected. It was going to get voted on at one point before the elections. The moderate Dems wanted to push it off after the elections because they hadn't done anything with a new stimulus plan yet for COVID. So it wasn't known that the runoff in Georgia was going to take place at the time, when that was contemplated.
Well, I'll explain for our viewers exactly why this might help out the runoff in Georgia. The runoff in Georgia is for 2 Senate seats between Democrats and Republicans, and in the balance would be, of course, control of the Senate. In Georgia, first of all, nationally, there's a 68% support for legalization of cannabis, so it's an issue that crosses party lines. Now, if you're trying to seduce someone who voted for Trump to come over and vote for Biden, one of the ways to do that is to say, hey, Biden's the bong party. We're the party of the dab rig. We're the guys that, bring the big fat buds, and we got big buds and we cannot lie. So that's going to be attractive to voters, as opposed to to the Republicans who really are not being progressive whatsoever on this issue. So,
I hope it does. Like there are people within the party there telling the other Republicans not to vote because this is just another rigged, totally fraudulent kind of exercise. So don't vote. I hope that some people take their advice too.
currently, the count in the Senate sits where the Republicans have a 2-vote majority over the Democrats. These 2 seats would eventually, if they both go Democrat, result in a tie for the 2021 and 2022 session in the United States Senate. And if that's the case, then ties are broken by the vice president, who's technically the president of the Senate. The vice president would be Democrat Kamala Harris. So this is a very important position, not just for the vote on cannabis, but if the Democrats take those 2 Senate seats, they now control who gets committee leadership, who is the Senate majority leader, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. Everything about how the Senate flows and functions is dictated by the party who's in charge of that vote. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't been able to get a cannabis bill brought up before the Senate for a vote for years and years and years and years.
Or anything that makes sense, for that matter, last few years.
We have heard senators complain that all they've done for the last 4 years is approve judges. They haven't voted anything significant. They haven't passed, other than budgetary things and the occasional COVID approval. They haven't really done much at all in the Senate.
Unfortunately, some of those judges had made the right call during this process of challenging the validity of the elections. It seemed pretty baseless for a long time, but finally, they produced a very credible star witness in Michigan the other day, which might just start turning tables.
Rudy Giuliani testified in Michigan to support the fact that there was voter fraud in Michigan and we should overturn the results, is what Jamie's referring
And
to.
wasn't Colbeck the star witness too?
Oh, it was that woman. I forget to think of her name. She works at the tech company, and she was drunk and gibberish.
Colbeck was on there too.
Yeah.
Actually,
he's never liked this stuff either.
what was weird was Jeff Irwin shared this video of this guy who like went up before and just like called out Rudy Giuliani, and like I met him. I gave him marijuana petitions for us like 2 years ago, and I think Jamie, you were the one who like was like, hey, give this guy Bill or something that you knew. That's his name, at least. I remember.
Was that the guy who was on Safer Mish too earlier today?
I
He
doubt
might
it.
be on Safer Mish for all I know.
Oh, okay.
But like,
Seemed like he might like Giuliani.
But Jeff Irwin shared this video about like him like saying this shit about Rudy Giuliani before Rudy Giuliani got up.
Oh.
And he collected signatures for us.
And the scenario of not being sworn in, which is common, obviously the testimony was just designed to give a forum for some kind of a favor to keep the confusion in the air.
Audience of one, actually. Audience of one. So
Having testified in front of the legislature many, many times, I've never done it at 6 p.m. Never. It's so unusual for them to have a session that late. It's just a weird one.
It was so
Not too
funny watching
surprising,
her
but-
tear into that one bald Republican from Wayland.
Yeah, Representative Johnson. Yeah. Hey, it doesn't say that there's 30,000 off. I'd say it's 100,000 off.
Yeah.
But it's not. Doesn't say that.
Wow.
Not exactly what we're talking about, but that funny nonetheless.
But that was funny.
I will say that when we look back at this in a couple of years, some of these claims that are being made right now that some people are taking very credibly, like Roger Stone saying that North Korean boats delivered ballots through a port in Maine in order to spoil the election against Donald Trump.
Our military just lets North Korean boats just come into the port.
Yep.
No problem. No news.
our 7-year dead Venezuelan dictator somehow had something to do with the election. I'm still not quite sure I understand that part, but
Hugo Chavez designed the whole system that's being used by the German company, where they have spy bots on all the polling machines and all the numbers go to Germany and then they get manipulated before they're returned back to the United States. And don't you know that's how they do these things? Don't you know?
I know. I should know this, right?
Oh, my goodness gracious. The conspiracy theories are thicker than mud on the bottom of the Mississippi River. The thing is, this is where people's intelligence is going to show through. I think there's some really smart people out there that are just totally falling hook, line, and sinker for some of these Republican things. And I'm going to look at that person with a jaundiced eye forever afterwards. If you were able to fall into some of this crap, if you were believing Rudy hair-dyed Giuliani and the crap that he's saying about Burisma and about the election and everything else, if you bought into that crap, you just don't have something up there.
Well, people feel sorry for him because he was ambushed by Borat earlier this year, so he still has some sympathy points for that. He was obviously taken advantage of, you know.
What about some of our own local celebrity politicians making it to the big time? The running Republicans, Storm and Norman Schinkel.
Oh my goodness. Norman Schinkel, for a little background, there was a time in 2016 when we were trying to get our cannabis legalization petitions approved. Norman Schinkel sits on the Michigan Board of Elections Committee, or whatever it is. What are they? No,
Canvassers.
Board of State Canvassers. That's correct. There's 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And he realized one day that his Republican Party member wasn't there, so it was 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, and he could easily be overvoted. So instead of doing the right thing, he just stood up and said, "I have an emergency," and ran out. And he was followed by this Detroit Free Press reporter, I think Christina Ferretti, and she's just following him with the microphone. "Where are you going? How come you're leaving? Where are you going?" And he kept making bad excuse after bad excuse as he's running down the hallway.
It could have been the difference of a legalization measure making it to the ballot on 2016 instead of 2018, because it was about a policy scenario that was really outdated, and it should have de facto been changed just by modernization and the fact that what used to necessitate going to each individual clerk in every community, in every county around the state, now was all on an electronic database. It was easily accessible.
Yep.
And this had to do with reviving older signatures by law. And instead of using the electronic database, which was put in the 90s for this exact purpose, they decided not to change their inner board policy. And that was the difference between possibility of making it to the ballot in 2016.
And Jamie's absolutely right. If Norman hadn't run out of the room at that point, it would have been voted for the Democrats, and it would have made a big difference, and history would have been different itself. Who just was trying to talk and I stepped on him?
Yeah. I'd like to kind of go back to the MORE Act here for a few minutes.
I still haven't seen that video yet, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot what we were talking about. Yeah.
The Borat video.
So, what happens now? Is this thing just gonna wither on the vine in the Senate till, maybe there's 2 new senators, and if Republicans retain control, it's like shelved for 2 more years? Is that really where we're at in the process?
It's shelved anyway because it dies at the end of the session, and we're almost at the end of the session. So it would have to be brought back up again next session and go through the whole process.
But if Mitch McConnell still remains in charge as Senate Majority Leader, then I think it's fair to say yes, it would just not be possible to bring that up for the next 2 years. After 2 years, there will be more senators elected. They elect new senators every 2 years because it's a 6-year position. So there would be an opportunity then, but we don't want to have to wait another 2 years. That's a real hassle. That's why George is important for this particular purpose. The other thing is, even if, Brad, to your point, even if we had enough people to vote yes on it, even if there were, let's say, 45 Dems and 10 Republicans, 55, more than we needed in order to get it, McConnell could still refuse to bring it for a vote because he's the boss. He's the majority leader, and he decides which bills come up and which don't. And it's oftentimes the case that the majority leader doesn't do what his senators want him to do just because he has other purposes in mind. So we do need leadership change in the Senate before we can make a fast move.
Well, since Mitch just got elected for another 6 years, it'll have to be a different way. So.
Well, but if
the runoff in Georgia,
yes, that's it. That would be the way. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's always possible the Republicans could choose a different Senate Majority Leader, but it's not probable.
No.
Mitch McConnell, go ahead.
Or a senator could die.
Oh. Yes.
Easy, Colin.
Well, you have something in mind.
There's a lot of
or otherwise become physically incapacitated.
I know what they're looking for.
Remember, now we're live on Facebook. So be careful here.
It's an episode of Twilight all of a sudden.
Well, it could happen, or they otherwise become physically incapacitated and unable to perform.
But you never know, what happens.
Might not take death. You know,
I will observe that earlier this year, not that long ago, there were some really shocking pictures from the Associated Press about Mitch McConnell's hands and his face, where he had clearly he was on some kind of blood thinner medication, which made his skin very bruisable. I have to believe the guy's not in the greatest of health. God bless him for still trying to serve the people, even though I don't agree with how he's doing it. He is trying to do something he thinks is good, so let's give praise where praise is due. But it's possible he may not finish out that 6-month term. And if that's the case, the Republicans could put someone new in as a Senate Majority Leader. But that's a lot of maybes. It's a lot of maybes. Let's just win Georgia. Let's just win Georgia.
Yeah,
Let's get
that simplifies everything immensely, right?
Yeah.
I guess my point was we'd be smart to start developing a 2-year plan.
Yep. Well, the other thing is, it's possible that we could get some form of cannabis law reform that's not as broad out of the Senate in 2 years. But would we want it? I mean, would we want something that doesn't really include expungements? Would we want something that's only about business licensing and tax collection, but not really about any of the personal freedoms or the other things that we like about the MORE Act?
if they took it off the schedule without a bunch of this extra crap in there, I would take that.
I take the Safe Banking Act.
Yep, I have to say, though, that I just don't see the complete removal from the schedule of controlled substances as a Republican policy option. I don't.
No.
I just don't.
Or Democrat, for that matter. I think there would be a handful of Democrats resistant to that idea as well.
Senate,
Yeah, certainly in the Senate.
We saw a few Democrats vote no on this particular MORE proposal
We did.
today. Yep. Now, I'm not sure exactly why that is, and it was only 6 out of over 200 and some that voted yes. 6 no or 5 no. Colin will correct me because he knows the right.
5 Republicans voted yes.
And 6 Democrats voted no.
Yes.
All right, so my 6 number's right. All right, okay. So, but the fact is, we're going to need a little bit of a sweeter pot in order for us to draw some of those moderate votes in. And sometimes, unfortunately, the way that they sweeten the pot is to take shit away from us.
That's right.
You know?
That's why I'm for the long-term planning on this. I know that I engaged Karen O'Keefe today on a post that she made about this. And, I questioned her on the tax, the 8% sales tax. I thought it sounded mighty steep. Maybe 2%. I don't want to give the feds a penny, to be honest with you, but we know that they're going to try to leverage their position for a piece of the pie. That's how the game works.
That's high.
Go ahead, Colin.
I was gonna say that's pretty high. Like 8% or 5% is what I heard earlier.
Yeah.
But like that would, like, for instance, in Michigan, which has like one of the lower tax rates, it's 6% sales tax plus the 10% excise tax. Plus that's like 21%, 23% or something like that. But I couldn't imagine like states like California. I know theirs is like already like in the 30 percentiles and just go up from there.
One of the stated purposes of cannabis law reform, not on my end, but from the federal end, would be to stop interstate trafficking, to stop unregulated transfer, and to stop importation. But adding more tax does nothing to do that. It really doesn't.
All this really does is bolster the black market. They're not going to be paying a 21% tax or 30% tax, right? So,
well, I mean, let's face it. When we say bolster, what we're really saying is just continue to maintain the status quo. People will not use brick and mortar centers if they're more expensive, and things will be the way they are.
Yeah, Colorado demonstrated that pretty conclusively early on by having a combined about 35% tax, and they had to scale that back. In Michigan, we capped it at 10%. I mean, it should not go any higher than that. That should be the cap, period. And that was for that reason, so that there'd be something to generate something with, but it was never really too high to be prohibitive for people.
Well, what we see, go ahead.
I think the MORE Act started out at 5% in the first year and built to 8% over 3 years.
That's why I've been hearing those two numbers. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, so but still 5%, 8%, like I said, anything beyond 2% is probably exorbitant. Do they get that kind of tax revenue from alcohol is what I want to know, because I honestly don't know.
Well, they do get federal taxation from cannabis, from tobacco sales. They do get federal taxation from petroleum product sales and from alcohol sales too. So there's a national model that they would be emulating by collecting tax. But I think they're just throwing numbers at a board when it comes to how much tax they're trying to collect here. You can't force people to buy this. People that are not in the cannabis game just don't seem to understand. The unregulated market is parallel, it's pervasive, and it's overpowering. It is everywhere. And your legal market ain't everywhere. So when you bring a new game to town, if that new game's not competitive, that new game fails. And you're really setting a lot of people up for disaster, stress, and failure if you're not going to make the business environment competitive with that pervasive and all-powering and all ever-present unregulated market. And too much tax is the worst way for it. California is seeing the same thing too. They have high taxes, and they're suffering for it. In Chicago, in Illinois, they have the abilities for municipalities to add additional taxes onto their cannabis sales. So we see the county of Cook, where Chicago is included in, has a tax. Plus, the city of Chicago also has a tax. Wow. So you can go just outside that zone, buy the exact same cannabis for less. But if you're in Chicago, out of town, having a good time, you're going to pay that tourist price. That's just how it goes. You get double taxed.
How does Oregon and Colorado stack up?
Well, as Jamie mentioned, Colorado scaled their tax back down, but it's still sort of on the high side, if I recall.
Yeah, right. And what's it at now, Jamie? Do you know? No? Shaking his head no. Okay.
No, he doesn't. No, I'm not sure either. I will tell you, Oregon and Washington, Washington specifically had a real problem with overtaxation, and then they had an oversupply. They had a ton of people that made a ton of cannabis, Oregon especially.
And they emulated the alcohol tier model too in Washington, and had to deal with that. Was not functional either.
Yep. So they divided things up into distributorships and made little fiefdoms for people, and it didn't work. And we've seen. Go ahead.
And that's part of the problem with inflated tax rates. They really do force product prices up, because the producers, the growers, they feel obligated, to charge higher prices. And the state really wants these guys to charge higher prices. So everybody, for the most part, on the business side of it, is eager for the higher prices, or certainly as high a price as they can get. I mean, we're seeing that to some extent in the marketplace now. Aren't pounds in the $5,000 range in the licensed market?
They're all the way down from 35. Then they dropped all the way to 2. There was like 6 or 7 of the big guys dropped their pants about a month ago, from $4,000 to 3,500 all the way to $2,000 overnight, because of there's like 5 factors in the market, like Croptober being one of them, October 1st deadline, taxes coming up, and so like it came down. It's going to swing back up though, but yeah, it's gotten a lot better. I don't think it's transferred over to the retail prices yet, but
that's part of the problem, is that you'll see, a big swing in pricing, and the prices are pretty quick to go up, but they're not very quick to come back down again. And that's,
like gas prices, right?
Yeah, well, that's profit taking, and you can't discount somebody for taking profit. That's what they do. But if you're profit taking makes your cannabis more expensive than that overpowering, pervasive, and ever present illegal market, you're shit out of luck. So a bad business model is a bigger enemy to these companies than the unregulated market ever presented. Because they're shooting themselves in the foot. Some of these companies have 7, 8, 9 guys in the C-suite. I got a CFO, a COO, a CEO, and then another CEO, and then I'm a CCC, and I don't even know what that stands for.
Chief Marketing Officer, all those guys, right?
Yep. And all of them at the C-suite level carry big attendant costs like salaries. Yep. So when you're looking at that, you've set up a corporate structure that's very top heavy. And if you're not meeting sales expectations, it's easy to do things like blame the regulatory framework, or blame the illegal market, or blame your city who licensed 5 or 6 dispensaries. The fact is, you just have a bad business model. So stop trying to drag everybody else down with you just because you suck.
Hey, I have a question. I watched Andrew Brisbo's Zoom session yesterday. One of the questions that came up was, should there be a cap on the number of provisioning centers in Michigan? I know there currently isn't, but you guys helped write all this legislation. I'm kind of curious to hear. Do you think there should be?
No,
No?
no.
No.
Nope.
Go ahead. Give me reasons why not.
The
What-
market should decide.
Yep, each individual municipality decides what's right for them. If you put a cap on it statewide, that means then you're now allocating a cap on a county by county level, then you're allocating a cap on a municipal level, and then you're eventually telling somebody like Ontonagon that they can only have 1.47 dispensaries instead of 3 like they wanted, and now all of a sudden they're stuck because they, you know.
All of these places that want to set up to go into business will do some type of contribution to fixing up the storefront, the
That's
area, that type of stuff. And whether or not they make it, that area is now primed for somebody else to come in and try their hand at that type of business or something else.
Speaking of which, I guess you were up in Kalkaska today, right? Or in that area?
Yeah, last couple of days. I was up
Yeah,
there.
and Rick was telling me I haven't gone through there in a long time. That's turned into one of the cannabis capitals of northern Michigan, right?
I think there's 4, maybe Ryan knows there's 4 places there right now, 3 or 4 anyway.
There's 3 open, gonna be 4th soon with the lounge, and then there's like 18 or 17 approved grows, and I think about 7 or 8 fully operational. Transport that's been going, a big processor, a couple other ones. They got a micro.
Wow.
They've really embraced it. I was up there in late 16, early 17, and they've like, even though they're under some, they've embraced it the whole time. There's going to be 1,000 marijuana jobs up there in that town. It's going to be more than the hospital within about a year and a half from now. It's pretty cool.
Well,
Yep.
Considering how depressed that area is up through there, great, right? A
Yeah,
pretty
and
good
it's
job,
it's
so-
30 minutes from everywhere up north. It's got a ton of car traffic, and Traverse City, Acme, they just screw around with stuff, and some of the other northern towns aren't getting the job done. So they're taking advantage of it. It's pretty cool. I'm excited.
This will be a botanical company right downtown with parking, and
And a lounge.
Company being the retail store, right directly next door to a lounge, the Kalkushka Lounge. Walk out front door of the botanical company, turn around, walk right into the lounge, and use your product. Very fucking cool. So really looking forward to that. And I was in the space. It's under construction, but it's nearing completion.
The old Opera House. It's a beautiful building.
Wow.
It really is, man. And there's a nice little riser up front by the windows for like a little stage area in there. I'm going to be involved in providing the coffee service in there, which I'm really excited about. And we're checking out those areas as well. And it's just going to be exciting. Tom
Little
Beller, who's
food,
a partner in that,
maybe,
who's
or
also,
something. You're gonna have like a little snacky
There'll
kind
be
of things, or
there'll be some prepackaged food, which is allowed, but you can't like create food there and serve it or anything. But right across the street, there'll be an area that the city's created for food trucks, which is going to be really cool too.
Yeah, they got a $3.1 million grant from the state about a year ago to fix up the area across from it too. It's going to be food trucks, pavilion, amphitheater. It's there's some changes coming. We'll see. I'm excited about it.
There's some other.
When you start,
Go ahead.
when you start talking about having that number of businesses in Kalkaska, providing that number of jobs, the beauty of it is, unlike a hospital, it's not just one entity. If a hospital shuts down, everybody loses their job. In this instance, you've got so many different business entities. Even if 1 or 2 fail over time for whatever reason, there's still plenty of other people still kicking it. You're never going to see that one big punch to the gut. In the in the Upper Peninsula, I saw when mental health centers were closed by the government, those communities really suffered because it was the single employer. Same thing with prison towns too. There's one guy, one thing that provides all the jobs, and you live or die by the success of that one particular business or industry. That's Kalkaska is so impressive. By the way, Kalkaska Township rejected in November a measure which was kind of promoted by some big business entities to have unlimited marijuana entities, unlimited marijuana businesses in the township. They just voted it down November 3rd.
really?
Yep.
So is there like a cap then, or what?
No, they don't have any proposal
No
right now.
caps.
Oh, just whatever.
Well,
Whoever
different from the
wants to do
village.
it.
We're
Okay.
there's right. Yeah.
Yep. So the village of Kalkaska has all these great rules. The township of Kalkaska has no rule. So they tried to force it in by a ballot proposal, but the ballot proposal was seen by many as very heavy-handed and perhaps poorly intended.
Huh.
If I can be a little political when I say those nice words, poorly intended.
It's very good. Very, very neutral, I guess. Right?
Yep.
That's good,
So,
right?
look, I'm of the opinion that I don't have to say yes to every suggested proposal that would improve marijuana laws. There are some suggested improvements that are just bad. Responsible Ohio as a statewide legalization effort for Ohio would have been terrible. The very first Arizona legalization effort would have also been terrible. The citizens voted both of them down. They would have created oligopolies, and that's not beneficial to the people.
So, some of that discussion, and at a certain point in time, is you go from things being felonies to there being an opportunity to be able to go to a store if you're 21 or over and buy some cannabis and walk out and not have to worry. And it was pitched to us all the time, like, don't worry about who makes the money. Just like, we're going to be able to create this situation where somebody can go into a store and walk out and not worry about the cost. And then, of course, going from things being a felony to being able to do that is an improvement. But it was kind of obvious and demonstrated through other ways that the public at large is ready to take that further sooner. And had Ohio been successful in their attempt at that oligarchy, and the people of Ohio wanted legalization. There was a group in Michigan that would have felt really empowered to move ahead with that kind of a concept here too. And we might have been facing a much worse scenario. We might have stores, we can go there and get them and stuff like that, but the level of participation and the amount, even though we complain about it now, it could have been really bad. Yep. And have we dodged that bullet? We got one of the better programs. I mean, there's room for improvement, but we got one of the better programs there is.
Nick Lachey was a big proponent of that Ohio ballot proposal, if you remember.
Boy band guy?
Nick Lachey, yep.
Yeah.
98 degrees.
It's sad that you know that, Kyle. But anyway.
I remember.
If we flip the conversation back around to the MORE Act, it's possible for us to look at something like the MORE Act and evaluate it with a very critical eye and say, yes, I do support this, but it's also possible that the 2021 version of the MORE Act may not be as generous as this one is. This one, of course, still has some shit in it that we don't like. The provision the last couple of days about banning people that have ever had cannabis crimes ever.
Or
that's just ridiculous.
Think it's even
How would that work, like, for state laws that permit it? Would you just have to succumb to that?
Yeah, federal law always supersedes state law.
It always supersedes state law, but if you are being more broad and liberal than federal law, they can choose whether or not to enforce anything, and whether or not they would is more of the question.
Well, that's kind of what it is now, because federal law is cannabis is still a tier 1 drug. They don't really enforce it.
It's exactly what it is now.
Yeah, right. So I mean, the states do their own thing, and the feds have kind of stayed out of it. And I think with the Biden administration, that's not going to change. So.
Well, if this passes and it says in there that people with previous, cannabis things can't, but that the state law is more broad and liberal and says that it can. So
maybe it goes to like
that's an overreach. That's something left to the states, in my opinion, unless they mean federal, or I don't know.
Colin?
I don't know. It'd probably go to a court, like a Supreme Court, in a way. If it passes. I think if somebody will have to sue, or somebody or a state will sue, or something will have to happen.
Maybe that's one of the things we could get them to take out when there's another run on it.
Look, my understanding of this is that the feds would actually license state cannabis businesses. So all of the businesses licensed by the MRA already would have to undergo another set of approvals, a federal set of approvals, which could bounce some of those people who are successfully in the cannabis industry right now out because of their history, which would have been state allowable, but federally not allowable. Yeah. And if that's the case, fuck that. I'm not standing up for any individual person, but as a general principle, if we've already got a successful industry running and you're going to come in here with a heavy hand and tell us that you're going to strain out people just because you don't like them, no way. That's not going to fly.
Yeah.
I mean, just taking it off the list takes away the conflict, and then now let the states deal with it as they see fit.
Well, I can tell you that this new version of the MORE Act that was voted on today was very heavily promoted by National NORML. I'm on the board of Michigan NORML, so is Brad, and I received several emails from National NORML with talking points and graphics and things to circulate in order to support the MORE Act. I can understand where they're coming from. I think when I read their literature, there were some things that they rather omitted or chose not to talk about. So we have to, again, even our most
NCIA, I feel did the same thing. MPP is coming out stronger against it.
Yep. So we have to be cautious in hearing even from our trusted sources, because nowadays I'm unsure what everyone's motives are. I just really don't know. I mean, Americans for Safe Access is pushing for employee certification programs, and I'm sorry, NORML isn't pushing for employee certification programs, and NORML's doing something else, or ACE is doing something else. Everybody's got a gig now. Jamie, you're on mute.
Yeah, ASA has certifications for like every component of the industry. It's based on the herbal pharmacopoeia standards. So we're doing that at the botanical company, actually. Whether the medical program just dies from dysfunction, or if there is a legislative move to combine the licenses, and there is no recognition of a specific medical program, we're making our standards such and making it known that we still have the ability to provide the health and wellness guidance, and that we understand that's still part of some people's approach to cannabis. We're prepared there to help people through that.
I'm also going to make it known that I ate most of a brownie that came in this non-compliant wrapper, right? That I got from a friend for my birthday.
So that means as the show progresses, you're going to get fuzzier and fuzzier, right?
I think I'm already peachy as I'm
seeing
fuzzy
colors,
around the
man?
edges.
All right.
No. I don't do medibles generally, and I picked it up and ate it, and I got halfway through and I said, that tastes like RSO. Oh no. What did you just do?
Yep.
So it'll be fun.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when we talk about the MORE Act, the significance of it, if we set aside the details that we're having some devils with, right? If we set those aside, the significance of it is that really we've got a House of Congress that says we need to just completely remove it from the schedule of controlled substances. This is no longer a Bernie Sanders campaign talking point. A House of Congress actually said, take it off the list. That's big. I mean, wow, right?
Yeah,
That is big.
And it is. I've watched earlier. Yeah, I watched earlier today. Yeah, sorry guys. I watched earlier today the NORML guys. They were all talking about the significance of this. And they were very proud that it has passed. They acknowledged that there were some shortcomings, but looking at it through their perspective, those guys have worked the halls of Congress on a daily basis for, I think Eric Altieri said he's been there since 2002. That's 18 years for him. I know that Keith started this in 70, so he's got 50 years invested into this process. So for those guys, this was really a monumental day because the United States House of Representatives voted to decriminalize marijuana. So in that sense, it was a big historic day. And really, I was a little bit of a negative Nancy in the beginning too. I'm still dissatisfied with some of the provisions in the language, but put in its proper perspective, this was a pretty darn big day. So
I think so too. I'm still concerned about some of the language that we've talked about today that's contained within the MORE Act. But I mean, some of the biggest voices came out in favor of cannabis today. Steny Hoyer, who is the leading Democrat, Jared Polis from Colorado also came out again big today too. A lot of organizations came out in support of this.
I think too, maybe as each of the states begin to legalize adult use, then their congressional delegations will be more prone to the idea of voting for it on a national level. What do you think?
Senators should. There's been some more representation from states now after this last election. in the Senate. The congressional majority is there, and yes, they should. They represent states that have it be legal, so they should have those interests in mind when they're representing. But the Senate, moving the Senate would be the.
I'd like to point out we have a couple people in the chat. Professor Gus Rosania from the University of Michigan reminds us we should deschedule. It's a plant, not a drug, a benign, non-lethal medicinal plant that is far less addictive than nicotine. Mr. Hashbash, Adam Brooks said this is a state's rights. The federal need to deschedule and go away. He also reminds us Santa is coming. I'm not sure what the reference is, but with Adam, you never really know.
Wait till that brawny kicks in, then you'll figure it out. So
you know what? I thought maybe it was impeding my ability, but now I see it's the only thing that's making me understand.
yeah.
So
Well,
no, fact is we're looking at some conversations about cannabis law reform at the highest levels of presidency, vice presidency, cabinet members talking about this openly and not getting smacked down for it. And more importantly, though, party members from both sides of the aisle are forced to answer questions about these things when they come up for local officials. Jamie and I were privileged to interview, and Colin were privileged to interview on Jazz Cabbage Cafe 3 or 4 different prosecutor candidates. And the Republicans had to answer questions about cannabis law reform issues just like the Democratic candidates had to. So everybody's had to make a stand on this now. You can't secretly be a hater. You have to own your position at this point. Jamie, didn't that feel good? Being able to get people on record and forcing the issue a little bit more?
It was. We missed out in Wayne County a little bit. Man, I can't think of her name right now.
Victoria
Burton Harris, yes.
Victoria Burton Harris, and now she's working in Washtenaw County as an associate prosecutor with Ellie Savitt, which is very cool.
Right.
But everybody else won, and we haven't had like 3 working very progressive prosecutors at the same time yet, and hopefully they can. Carol Seaman in Ingham County won her reelection, but she was kind of alone. Now, not that everybody was bad necessarily, but man, these people are on record saying they really want to change. And we ask them, a lot of people have said that. And then when they get in position to go do it, they realize that the machine is kind of more difficult to manipulate than they maybe imagined. And I think that was acknowledged a little bit, but they were definitely very motivated to want to try to really affect change and change policy in regards to a lot of the stuff that we talk about. I'd really love to see it.
Oftentimes it's all about getting people on record. We're going to hold Kamala Harris's promises made during this election, hold her up to those. And we have to do the same thing with our local officials too.
Yeah. And we after Victoria lost her primary, she joined us, the Democratic caucus, in the interview with those other candidates. It wasn't a Jazz Cabbage Cafe broadcast. It was through the Democratic Cannabis Caucus. And she facilitated a lot of that discussion with her background and knowledge of what somebody could do in the position of prosecutor, and also acknowledge how some things cost a lot. And you'd have to figure out how really you want to allocate budget. You could spend a lot of time trying to correct a lot of previous injustice, but that takes up a lot of resources, so that might not be as practical. But then there are some organizations that help out with that, and these prosecutors are looking at trying to help bring those in, groups like that, and to help review some of these old cases and see which things might really need to be looked at and fixed potentially. So really would love to see that kind of stuff.
I think it's big progress whenever we get people to start talking about cannabis law reform, but when the top guys are doing it, we've really made a difference. The problem is not getting legalization. The problem is shepherding legalization the way that we want it to go. It was a big thing getting our law passed in 2018. It really was. But what we've seen is that the ongoing, attendant issues are just so complicated and overpowering once you get it. On a federal level, they're going to be complicated by really deep-seated institutions like the FDA and the DEA, and even international trade organizations who are going to want to restrict things like hemp and cannabis from being transferred. So what a big project this is going to be. But it all starts with taking cannabis off the schedule of controlled substances.
Well, it's the DEA that's behind keeping the hemp down to 1/3 of 1% THC. Otherwise, you got to burn your crop. And it's just driving the hemp community crazy because it's so hard to get that precise. And typically what's happened is 25% of the fields around the country have to be burned because they go above, they go hot, So right there, the DEA.
Ryan Basor, you have a lot of knowledge in the industry. What would you say the percentage of cannabis crops in the MMFLA MRTMA system have to be destroyed because they fail testing?
I think it's actually gone way down, Rick. With so much more rec plants getting grown, it's gone from the 10,000 CFUs on the mold to 100,000. That was the tough one. And then understanding, the issues with whether it be nickel or some of the other things. So it's gone down, but then, it's just going to get remediated anyway. There's a lot. I mean, we know about some of the grows we always hear about behind the scenes from employees, stuff like that. It's always getting remediated or getting turned into oil or, distillate. So it's hard to put a number on it, but my guess is 10%, 15% now.
Well, that would be a reduction because at one point it was legitimately 30% of the crop out there. And that was, I think, middle of 2019. And again,
people learned their livelihoods depended on it, and information got shared,
Well, and I think a lot of times people anticipated they'd be able to duplicate their small scale success in a large scale environment, but that comes with so many different attendant issues that it's not easily accomplished. And I think most gardeners will tell you it takes a couple of grows before you get your whole shit dialed in.
Well, even something in a nutrient line that somebody paid a consultant and they didn't check and it had something in it made it fail. I mean, how many stories I've heard of that? And, it's.
And the Shanaquets talked about hearing people in the hemp industry where they had great product in the field. They took it down, and during the drying process, it ended up going above that 0.3 standard and became hot. So, you did everything right and then do something completely beyond your control.
Yeah.
Something happens. And then because we have arbitrary, ridiculous, and brutal, really brutal rules, then oftentimes that means the difference between whether you have 2 seasons of a grow or only one. So
yeah, can you imagine that? Like the feds come running in on your hemp crop because it's just a couple points high and like threatening you with guns and burning your stuff and like acting like you're some crazy criminal.
I just watched. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jamie.
I was going to say, ideally, at some point, it doesn't matter what the composition of any particular compound is in the plant. Somebody designates, a certain crop to be used industrially for whatever purpose that they have, and it shouldn't make a difference, and nobody has to worry about that stuff.
I just read an article where it was the journalist was there when a hemp crop had to be destroyed, and there were federal agents on hand, and the guy who grew the hemp, had to feed it into the destroyer, had to feed it into the crusher. And here's this guy, here's his toil, here's his labor, here's his love, just getting slaughtered. That's don't make him do it. I mean, let him go someplace else while it's taken care of. That's extra penalty. But, we are still trying to figure a lot of this stuff out. And there's a lot of laws that are created by people who were in support of the drug war who only begrudgingly are giving us what little teeny bits of freedom they can possibly be scraped out of. Instead of the bold steps forward that we think we should be taking. So you can clearly see the ones that are barely giving us anything versus the ones that are actually doing what we need them to do. And hemp laws need to be relaxed. There's nothing like telling the American people we need to get back to family agriculture and then taking a perfect family agriculture situation and making it completely unworkable as a business model. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, in Michigan too now, just to get a hemp license, it's $1,250 for an application fee because we've gone to mirror the federal regulations as of November 1st. And so it used to be $100. So I'm on the iHemp Power, and we've been talking about this, and a lot of farmers are just saying, no, not going to do it because it's still so risky. Everyone's still trying to figure out how to do it because it's so new. And they're spending $10,000 to $15,000 an acre just to build out the crop. That's just, paying for a few things. That's not all the labor that goes on during the whole course of the year. So they're big investments. And then there's very risky right now with that 0.31%, thing that the DEA has imposed. So yeah, it's a real mess.
I'll say this: there's a lot of people that grew hemp that wanted to grow CBD heavy, THC light cannabis. And they called it hemp because of its chemical definition, because that's how we define it. But they're not really skilled at things like growing corn or growing other agricultural crops. So they grew cannabis the way that they know how to grow cannabis, and they grew some amazingly great cannabis. Some of that hemp crop that I've seen were beautiful tops. You just wanted to rub your face in them. But the fact is, well, I mean,
Motorboat the butts. Yeah.
I think that brownie's kicking. But go ahead, Rick.
okay, we can say that's what it is. All right. But the fact is, I mean, we've seen some great success at that. But that's not what traditional hemp farming is. Traditional hemp farming involves not production of flower for CBD, but production of fiber, hemp, or seed hemp, or other things.
There's 20,000 uses for hemp, and I know I only know this because I've been covering this all year. But there's people in the state that want to create a hemp textile industry in Michigan because we're really good at manufacturing. Agriculture is the number 2 industry. Nice fit there, eh? And so they're working with the governor trying to get that done, but it's a long, slow slog, right?
Well, we've had Greg Pulowski on both the 420 Post and Jazz Cabbage Cafe talking about the opportunities in the city of Detroit. Right. One of the things the city of Detroit could certainly do would be to have some real estate and put up a hemp processing facility. Absolutely. Decorticators, all of the things that are industry specific for that. And here's what I can tell you is that farmers, although they don't want to, farmers from the thumb will drive their crop down to a Detroit processing facility if that's the only processing facility they got. As long as they know there's one available, they'll grow a crop. But if you tell them that after they grow a crop of fibrous hemp that there's no place for them to take it to get it converted into whatever product it's going to be, what's the point?
Well, they're trying. I'm sorry to be interrupt there, Jamie. They're trying to get the auto industry interested in this because a couple of the big fancy manufacturers like Porsche and BMW are using, instead of using like plastic or composite materials in the interior and exterior of their vehicles, they're using hemp-based products, right? So by the way, Greg's going to be on the iHemp Hour on December 31st, the New Year's Eve show. And he's going to have, I can't tell you who, there's a elected official that may be joining him, but I'm not allowed to tell you who that is. So, but I'll provide more information later. But one of the things they were talking about is if Billy Ford, who's Mr. Green anyway, right? If we can get him and Ford really interested in this, wow. I mean, just think how much hemp they would need, to produce these components and whatnot.
Well, that's part of the problem. Go ahead, Jamie, please.
I said it would have become full circle because that was some of the beginning of demonstrating how this could be a great industrial product, and before it was unceremoniously shut down.
Yeah.
But and part of that conversation with Greg, we also talked about how the city could utilize hemp in terms of remediating some areas of land, which is an interesting conversation. And he said he did bring that up to the mayor, and the mayor thought that was interesting.
I'm not sure how much we're going to have Dugan. I know he's a big backer of Biden, and I've been hearing rumors that he may somehow get into the Biden administration, but I don't know if that's actually going to be the case or not. And so if that does happen, what's going to happen if he leaves? So I know, speculation, right?
Right.
We could easily get somebody who's more broad and liberally minded on the issue too, because he hasn't been the best over the last few years on it.
No, it looks like he said Johnny come lately to the pro cannabis thing. I think when you start talking about the dollars and cents of it, that it makes sense to anybody that looks at this with an unjaundiced perspective. This is the wave of the future. I think everybody knows cannabis is here to stay. It's growing like a tsunami, and industrial uses of cannabis materials go hand in hand with recreational uses of cannabis materials. So, I mean, if the city of Detroit were the first one in the state to jump on board with this, they'd really have an edge, an opportunity to exceed instead of just trail behind. And that, I think, is a pitch that works no matter who sits in that seat.
Well, Greg mentioned there is 39,000 vacant parcels of land in Detroit. Now, a total of 75,000, but a lot of those still have dwellings on them. So I'm not sure how much total land that is, but that's got to be a lot of acreage, right?
But here's the thing, though. If you have a hemp company and now because of the MORE Act, some interpretation of that means that you now have to register as a federal company, and now you have to go through a bunch of extra checks, and you have to pay out a bunch of extra money, and now there's going to be an extra fee involved. That's a disincentive for the small guys to get into the hemp industry. As you mentioned, Mike, used to be a very inexpensive hemp farming license. Now it's a very expensive hemp farming license, and people are dropping out of the system because of it. If they want to make the system exclusive, one of the ways to do that is to make it super expensive to get in, and the MORE Act kind of does that, actually.
Yeah.
So, extra fees and extra checks and extra taxes, those are the things that the legislature did with the MMFLA to discourage folks like us from being able to buy.
And it's already a very expensive business to get in. I mean, I've only been covering it for 2 years, but I've been astounded about how much money you need to really pull this off. It's not a poor man's game.
I'm amazed that anybody can do agriculture, because the fact is you essentially have to put up all the money up front and then continue to pay out of your butt month after month after month before you finally get a payoff at the end of the year. I mean, to me, wow. That's a lot of bookkeeping. That's a lot of records. But the reality is people do it successfully all the time. And in the cannabis industry, it's just more difficult because we don't have access to proper banking. Everything we want to do is more expensive. The equipment to be able to properly do like a hemp industry doesn't commonly exist, and therefore has to be special ordered or is in short supply. I mean, there's just a lot of obstructions. And as far as processing, though, Mike, one of the things is what came first, the chicken or the egg? What's going to come first, the processing facility and then lots of hemp being produced afterwards, or lots of hemp being produced and then a processing facility springing up? If you're a processing facility manufacturer, you'd like to see that there's a bunch of hemp biomass already available before you construct your facility, so you don't have to wait to retrieve profitability for your business. If you build it and then wait for the industry to build around you, that could be a prolonged amount of time not being profitable.
Same thing for the.
Go ahead, Jamie. Go ahead.
Same thing for the farmer. How many times have we heard by people who are engaged? All right, Jim Salame's joining us. How many times have we heard from people engaged in the hemp industry and getting involved in this that those who are going to be producing a crop should have a target for the harvest before they really get started. Or else
absolutely, yeah.
And so in other words, the manufacturing plants will be working with the farmers, and that should all be coming together. And
I'm not a farmer, but I've kind of been educated on how farmers operate, and they get 2 multi-year contracts with people that are going to buy their crop. So they know exactly who's going to get it on the end. And that's how they get all their loans to do what Rick says, because you got to float the whole year, wait for your harvest. And so if you got those contracts, then you can get the lines of credit in order to get that done. But none of that's existing right now in the hemp or the cannabis space, really, is it?
Well, I think financing is available to cultivation people. Insurance is available to cultivation people too in certain circumstances, but not easily available, and certainly not at competitive rates. My understanding is.
Yeah, there's people doing financing now, but you got to put, and you got to personally guarantee or put up a building. You got to put up a lot of equity. And I know of a bank though I just met with was willing to do that for the right risk at 7%, which was actually pretty crazy low, the lowest I've heard. But yeah, not much at all. Yep.
The industry is still, as progressive as we've been so far. In a lot of places, it still hasn't made a dent in the old armor of the old ways. And one of the ways is the insurance and the banking industry. You do find some wildcatters that'll get you crop insurance and things like that too for the hemp and for the cannabis industry. But for the most part, a lot of firms are staying right away. I know people have difficulty finding architectural firms and other things because they don't want to have dealings with the cannabis industry. So
hemp space, they give you insurance for crop failure, but they don't. But if you have to burn your crop, that's not covered.
Right. If you successfully harvested and it was just
crop failure, right?
Yeah. No. Well, insurance agencies they try the best to wiggle out of responsibility for any claim that's given towards them. So Yep. Jim, we were talking about the MORE Act originally. Now we've drifted afield to talk about hemp issues. Why don't you bring us back with the MORE Act? You haven't had an opportunity to lend your thoughts to the conversation. Please do so, if you would.
It's exciting. It's, kind of symbolic because I'm sure you guys all mentioned that it's probably not going to go any further than this. I think I said last week, there's a chance that maybe some minds have changed and, maybe it could get passed in the Senate, but it's an exciting time. And all this does is give us just more ammo for getting the word out and getting it more less marginalized and more legitimized.
Yep. Well, as a method of normalizing cannabis law reform, I mean, it doesn't get much better than a vote in the United States House of Representatives. It's really just 2 steps away from becoming law. House of Representatives, get the Senate, and then you get the Pres. So that's a really big one. Of course, we took issue with some of the provisions of the MORE Act, including, the prohibition against anyone who's had a cannabis arrest. Actually, Ryan, the language is pretty vague. If you
That
got a
was more
cannabis
than like
arrest,
investigation, they could say.
yeah, I mean,
We're all screwed.
Really?
I'm pretty sure they've got a file on most of the people on this phone call.
Especially
They do
Dugliotti
what they
over
do
there.
now,
Mike
so.
Brennan, you're too new, Mike. You probably don't have a
I'm
fed
That's
okay.
the
file.
story over there.
I'm clean, man, so.
Yep. Those of us that have been in the game for a bit, So, but the fact is, they make the anti-net so broad and so vague that it could affect a huge number of people, and that's just got to get cleaned up. That language cannot exist. We know that that's just, it's not going to fly. Now the question becomes who in Washington D.C. is capable of making those type of negotiations to express on behalf of the citizens of the United States of America that there are certain things you've got to do. And although we respect the fact that they're helping out veterans, yay, and that they're helping people that were disproportionately impacted, yay, you can't stop people who've had cannabis investigations from. And Ryan, it's not just ownership; it's also even working in the industry, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's I haven't got it that far into that. I don't want to speak if it's working on it or not, but
Yeah. But I mean,
we're not gonna. I mean, what are they gonna? I think there'd be a lot of people that would be doing a little civil disobedience again. So.
yeah. Well, here's what I think. If we've got the we've got the National Cannabis Industry Association, we've got National NORML, we've got Drug Policy Alliance, we've got Americans for Safe Access. There are probably only half a dozen, maybe 10 organizations that actually speak on behalf of cannabis issues in Washington, D.C. right now. And if a bunch of them are ready to just go forward with this because it's a pro-business policy and damn the fact that it does some of these other horrible things, it might be difficult to get our message understood by lawmakers. What is that a fear that is shared by others?
I think MPP's on board. I think there's going to be a lot of the membership of the NCAA is going to speak to them about it. I would expect them. So I feel like some of those and NORML. I think they'll definitely carry that message or at least talk about it. So I'm hopeful on it, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So.
Well, again, they just passed that amendment the last couple of days. That's a typical legislative sly move, right? You've got a bitter pill that you're going to put in that package, and you don't let the kid see it before it just goes in his mouth, right? So that spoonful of sugar helps the bitter medicine go down. And that's what they do when they want to hide stuff from us. That's the kind of techniques they do.
I was going to break into song there, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say what was a little upsetting was watching the House today and seeing people stand up and speak against cannabis and some of the things that they came up with were just so antiquated now. And they should include like some sort of Twitter disclosure on some of these statements that they're making that says that this is not factual, for the sake of for everyone's sanity, because it's insane some of the things that they throw out there.
I think it's like like
Well-
like 40% of the United States population lives in a state with legalized cannabis. There's been no medical emergencies. Please go ahead, Jamie.
I remember we were in Allen Park at like a community discussion type thing, or Darren McCarty was there also, and so was Steve Miller from LEAP, the ex-cop, and there was a group in opposition that was firing off stuff that like we remember kind of dealing with maybe like 10 years or 8 or 10 years before that. You know, that's that same type of thought shows up in decision making sometimes. We've progressed for so long here, and then all of a sudden you're hearing somebody talk about like, you know, how bad it is, or it might get to the kids, or, you know, shit that's just been that we're over with for a long time now. But that's still predominant in some people's discussion.
Well, when it comes down to it, there really aren't that very many good reasons to argue against cannabis. There just aren't. So you see them recycling the same arguments because they got no new disses, man. They got nothing else to say. I mean, I hate to try and brag, but as a community, we have effectively discouraged people from talking shit on all of the different talking points they used to use. And by the way, those viewers that may not know this, if you go to the National NORML website, NORML.org, they have a whole list of discussion talking points and how to defeat some of these arguments that people use about child use and dispensaries are going to increase crime. They've got responses for all of those. So we've done a really good job of beating up those issues. They just don't have any new weapons to use. Except for the Project Sam.
Except for they make shit up and people believe it, so it still causes a problem.
Right.
Well,
Fear still works for them.
Yep. Well, Project Sam has been pushing this whole big thing that it's that cannabis legalization is backed by big pharma and big tobacco, and we're substituting one evil for another. That's actually kind of a relatively new talking point. Not effective in my mind, but that is the only new talking point I can think of that the antis have come up with. Even Scott Greenlee, who ran around the state with his pants down, showing everybody his ass, talking about how terrible cannabis was, got a whole bunch of communities to opt out. But none of the things he said ever actually carried water, had merit, or have proven to be true. So
where do you think we're going in 2021? You got a great panel here, all these experts. I know it hinges on the Georgia thing, part of it, but other, you know, if that doesn't work out, then what? What do y'all think?
I think the situation continuing as is kind of works. I mean, yes, it doesn't suck, sure, but here in Michigan, I mean, continue to coast. With no federal guidance, we're still kicking ass and taking names.
And even a better chance now that there probably won't be, you know, federal interference with what we're doing here.
I think we'll have still a possibility they start talking about the Safe Banking Act. I think that has the best thing to pass if Georgia goes to the Republicans.
There are several proposals that wouldn't be as sweeping as the MORE Act, which are probably more bipartisan in nature and could squeeze through in 2021 and 2022. This is such a voter-friendly issue that I know there'll be people that want to hitch their wagon to that star and vote yes on cannabis legislation so they can bring it home as a trophy to their constituents. That's how important our issue is nowadays. Remember when they used to run from us like we were Frankenstein? Now, you know, they're like a porn star in a Donald Trump yacht.
You're right to an extent, but you know, when we rush to pass something like that, usually we get stuck with a bunch of provisions, you know, like a tax or an exclusion or some other horse shit that we really don't want in the bill.
That's one of the reasons we were afraid of a bill being introduced during this year's lame duck session. The bill was proposed by the MRA and Speaker Chatfield's office and several other folks that would have merged the MMFLA and the MRTMA together, but to do something like that in lame duck is too dangerous. The craziest shit gets added in lame duck, and people are forced to vote for things they don't understand, they don't like, but just because they wanted to get their own favorite bill passed in the last moment, they're squeezed into doing something they don't want to. So we successfully, along with a bunch of other groups, successfully discouraged the MRA from putting that up for passage this year. It will be introduced again in 2021, but that was a success we had. And Brad, to your point, that's exactly why, because you never know. You can introduce a bill, and it can look completely different by the time it's actually reached the governor's desk.
I agree.
Ryan Basar, Jamie Lowell, we've certainly seen that happen in legislation where we introduce something one way, and then by the time it gets out of Senator Jones's Judiciary Committee, it looks warped and twisted and has no bearing or resemblance to what we started with.
The MMFLA looked a little bit different than the original bill that was introduced by Representative Colton.
Looked a lot different. That's what I was referring to. There are some people that I'm glad are not in the Senate any longer that were long-term impediments. Ours, Senator Jones, who was a bad guy as a House rep and then a tough guy as a senator. Him not being around helps us out too, but
There's a lot. That whole posse that stuck together in the House and in the Senate.
Meekoff.
Arlen Meekoff is where I was going next. Yep.
Johnson.
Yeah, Rick Johnson from the old Senate Majority Leader and the whole licensing board thing.
Randy Richard Bill.
Oh yeah.
See, and here's what happens when you have. I'm sorry.
The hits keep coming.
Oh yeah.
And he worked with Greenlee and company too.
Clint Kesto, the reprehensible representative,
Oh,
the
yeah.
guy who took the whole testing program's language and just introduced it as a bill, and the guy who actually first time ever that we know of in the history of Michigan, he made people vote before we took public input on the bill because it was so unpopular. He knew that
committee voted on it. And he's like, okay, let's take public input.
And later that night we had at that time House Rep Irwin on a program on the Planet Green Trees program, and I said to him, have you ever seen a situation where they've actually voted on a bill first and then taken public testimony? He said, never. It's completely not what we do. He said everybody was shocked. And I was like, I thought so. Thank you for confirming. But yeah, there were a lot of people.
Let's not forget our friend Bill Schuette here too. He played a little bit of a role in this process. I want to address Mike's point real quick. Mike asked, what comes next. I think we're, a couple years, maybe 2 or 3 election cycles away from, any substantive federal cannabis reform. I just don't think there's the political will in the Democratic Party to toe the line, so to speak, because it's obvious there's not going to be a lot of Republican support for this. We saw minimal support today, but that's my view. I think we're a little farther out than most other people. I think the fights. There's a lot of fight left in the dog. Let's put it that way.
Mike Brennan made a point earlier that typically in midterm elections, the ruling party loses seats in the House, and the ruling party would be Democrats this time around in 2022. And if that's the case, to get something done in 23 and 24 might be even tougher, since we may have a thinner majority or maybe even lose control of the House itself. So if that's the case, we really have this 2-year window that we can really count on in order to get something done. Will it be a priority for the Biden-Harris administration over all the other things they've got going on? Who knows? But this is really what I would look for, something to get done in the next 2 years.
So just to get back to Schuette here for a second, I want to piggyback on Brad's mentioning of him. The opening of the acts, and in some cases the MMA has been discussed and actually worked on along the way. And the idea of this original project that we discussed was about merging the licenses but in that process, other things get kind of inserted in there and other interests and, attempts to kind of, effectuate things going other ways happen. And and some of those are good, some of those are bad. But if we're going to start opening stuff up, there's many things, particularly with the MMMA, that Schuette effectuated that created just dysfunctional interpretations and approaches to it, and those things can stand to get fixed while we're in there opening shit up and getting enough support, because it requires a supermajority, which is 75% of the legislature, to amend one of these people's acts, and then that's going to go down. We should be doing some very positive shit along the way too, if we're going to get any more complex than just merging these licenses.
The other issue that's coming up is the 2022 elections will be the gerrymandering that went on for the last 10 years by the Republicans will be dealt with, because you have the Citizens Committee that's going to redraw all the lines. It'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out, because if you look at the total votes cast in Michigan, it favors Democrats over Republicans. But you know, obviously in some sectors, like the northern Michigan part, is more Republican than Democrats, more urban than rural. But again, I think what you're going to see happening is these majorities that the Republicans have in this Michigan Senate and House may go away very soon. Who knows?
Well, I think that's true, but what we've seen in the past is oftentimes, even when we have a trifecta, which would be the same party in control of the House, Senate, and the gubernatorial seat, oftentimes stuff still doesn't get done because there's just so much difficulty negotiating amongst the ruling party itself and then also with the executive branch. So I love to think that that would remove some of the barriers that we have to success. I'm sure it probably will help. But I mean, the process is still cumbersome and the process is still, you know, very combative, no matter who's in charge.
Yeah.
Are all the senators, Michigan senators, up for re-election in 2022?
No, only half of the senators are up in 2022. The other half are up in 2024. So
Okay,
But
you know
all the representatives are up in 2022.
yeah, the reps go
Right.
every 2 years, but the senators every 4.
And you know, I think it's going to be again several election cycles before Democrats, even with redistricting, even with a favorable redistricting, retake the Senate. I think Republicans have what, a 10-seat majority. I think the number of seats, though, may change. I've heard talk that we're going to lose 1 seat at the federal level in the Congress.
Yep.
We may lose a district or 2 here in Michigan. So, you know, there'll be a little bit of a different set of dynamics going forward after redistricting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what we've seen though is that we've seen a remarkable number of people remove themselves from either party identity and declare themselves to be independent. That means that there's a lot of ambiguity added to some of these elections going forward. People that were completely disgusted by Hillary Clinton's selection and said, I'll never be Democrat, and then said, oh my God, I can't believe those guys chose Trump, I'll never be Republican. They're still going to be casting about for some place to put their votes. Now, whether that means that the third party candidates will have a greater opportunity or whether each individual major party has to do a better job of recruiting those neutrals, I don't know. But I can tell you that's going to add a lot of fudge factor to all the upcoming elections. It's going to be difficult to predict where places are from a Democrat and Republican standpoint any longer. It used to be that almost everybody in the voting column had decided one or the other, and independents were a really small number. Now, independents are approximately 1/3. So based on some of these numbers, you got 40% Republican, 40% Democrat, 20% independent, plus or minus 10. So,
well, there are some third and fourth party candidates as well that take up a small percentage.
Right.
They're more of the spoiler role, like in 2016.
I think when we see what's going on in the world, that'll have a lot to do with what happens in the next election. I think many of us, myself included, were afraid that Donald Trump would start some type of international military incident because it's very difficult to reject a sitting president in the middle of a conflict. You want stability, you want a steady hand. Even if you don't agree with the decisions, you don't want there to be conflict within if you have conflict without.
You know,
And maybe that'll happen in 2022 and things will just be different.
even though, speaking of Trump, that, he's had this remarkable run during his administration, there is discussion of preemptively pardoning his kids, Giuliani, and himself.
And Devon.
We know that he's already allowed Michael Flynn. He's commuted. He's pardoned Michael Flynn, who admitted to obstructing Congress and lying twice to federal prosecutors. He already gave Michael Flynn, former general, a pass. He's helped out his other guys, Roger Stone. So he's well known for perking the elite. But that's brazen, right?
Well, the two different things are preemptively and then himself. I mean, those guys were convicted and stuff, and he did, I guess, what he's allowed to do. pardon him. I mean, in this
There's
case,
even this crazy idea of going around that he'll resign on the last day. Pence will become president for 12 hours, and he'll do all the pardoning. I've heard all sorts of stories.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if that's how it goes, because Trump wants that pardon no matter what. And frankly, I mean, if you know your kids are dirty, so dirty that you're willing to whore yourself out to get a pardon for everybody. I mean, I can't wait for the details to come out. You know what? Never mind. I'm going to shut up.
No, go ahead. You're on a roll.
No. There's a couple of potential scandals that I see coming out of the White House. You know, for Donald Trump is the only president ever to have a lock installed on his bedroom door in the residence.
Really?
Typically, secret.
Melania out, right?
Yep. So, well, I mean, I'm pretty sure his wife didn't spend a whole lot of time.
Go talk to Putin without anybody else.
I mean, did he have some kind of? He wanted to have some kind of dialogue. Was there some kind of attire that he needed to remove in the evenings?
Even Elvis had the jungle room.
Image out of my head.
I know. So yeah, I mean,
FaceTime with Vladimir.
Yep. So the fact is, I think we're going to see a lot of these. Yeah, these could be that. There's a lot of there's going to be a lot of tell-all books that come out from this time period, and I'm gonna love to read them.
Can't wait till the movie screenplay comes out. Right, that'll be a great one.
When we talk about this, though, one of the things Biden said just today, they asked him what he thought of Donald Trump saying he's not going to attend his inauguration. He says, personally, on a personal level, it doesn't really make a difference to me. He says, but on an international level, it does make a difference to the nations that are watching America, and that they want to see a smooth transition of power. They want to see continuity. They want to see stability, because we're a big negotiating partner, we're a big trading partner, and we're a big military presence. And what we've seen from Donald Trump is he's breaking military promises that we made to nations. We said we would keep armed presence there, and we're pulling out. Now we're doing this, we're doing that. People are worried, and they want to see that we have at least stable leadership. And having Donald Trump be there to pass the torch would somehow signify that. I don't think it's likely that Donald will show up for that, but I think that the statement was correct. I'd like to see us get to some semblance of a normal transition of power instead of this combative "I won, you lost" kind of shit.
Well, yes. The other day he held like a press conference from like on Facebook live or something, and he declared it was his most important speech that he ever made, and he was like still like saying that he has all these like the election was rigged against him in like these 5 states and everything, and I mean he's still like playing to that. I mean, I wouldn't be doubt if he quits on the last day and Pence tries to pardon him or what.
That's a speech where he said like a Barr could either be like go down in history as one of the greatest AGs of all time, or he could just be a normal AG.
No intimidation there. This guy.
Was that the same one, Colin?
I don't know. I didn't hear about that.
Not going anywhere. He's raised so much money. He's raised like hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, that's what this whole thing is really about. Is he owes the mob $400 million, the Russian mob, and he's trying to scam everybody into paying him so he can pay them. So
the greatest hustles in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Well, I will tell you this. I mean, once he's released from his obligations at the White House, he may not want to visit Russia. There may be some special people waiting there for him if he arrives in that place. He's the ties between this president and Russia are just ridiculously crazy. Remember when he first came on and he was kissing the North Korean dictator's ass, and he was talking about how wonderful China was, and then that just got played out really fast, and all of a sudden flip-flopped, and now we're enemies with everybody. I mean, what was that all about? Was he really that naive?
Yeah.
Well, he has received more votes for president than anybody in history.
No, he didn't. Well, I guess because he ran twice, right? Yes. Yeah.
Good point.
What? So what I was referring to. Go ahead, Brad. Sorry.
That's okay. I'll be brief. That's why I think, I'm not a huge Trump supporter. Don't take me as a Trump guy. But I think it would be unwise to discount the 73 million people that voted for him.
Yep.
I mean, that's still a powerful block of people.
Mhm.
So Democrats would be wise to get a good set of policies. That's what people want. Neither party's offering that right now. So,
Well, Brad, you can say people want a good set of policies, but there's those 73 million people that voted for Trump's set of fucked up policies. So I'm not sure that makes,
I think there's room there for compromise. Like you said, or somebody said earlier, there's a growing middle segment of independent voters. I think the more that the parties appeal to that group, you know.
Well,
But
the Democrats traditionally had the labor as a big backer, but labor has become less and less a factor in the United States workforce over the years, and they've lost that power base. Now, we saw, I think, 88% of African Americans voted Democrat at this time. Only 12% voted Republican, and the Republicans thought that was a great number. They thought that was a real big improvement for them. So we also have some other power bases too, but you have to reach beyond our traditional areas of support to go into those places where, people like Eric Gunnels are at. Eric Gunnels is a Democrat, but he's also a gun-loving Democrat, and he's a freedom-loving Democrat, and he buys some of the things that they say about Donald Trump, even though he's a Dem. There are those people out there, and we do have to have a party that speaks to all of its members, not just to the most liberal or the most powerful of our members.
So what I was referring to before was actually it was Thursday, and it was an interview on Fox with a business reporter, Maria Bartiromo. So President Trump on Thursday said he hopes U.S. Attorney John Durham, who is investigating origins of the Russia probe, is, quote, not going to be politically correct, unquote, and warned that Attorney General William Barr could go down as, quote, the greatest Attorney General, unquote, or just, quote, an average guy, unquote, depending on what comes out of the months-long probe.
So the John Durham probe is going to be the one that determines who's winners and losers in this, and not all the rest of the impeachment process that we went all the way through?
Obama knew everything. Vice President Biden, as dumb as he may be, knew everything, and everybody else knew, unquote.
As dumb as he may be, is that what Trump said about Biden?
This is a quote. Obama knew everything. Vice President Biden, as dumb as he may be, knew everything, and everybody else knew.
That's a new presidential standard, right? I guess.
The list goes on. Okay. He added like many names, I guess, on that rant.
What do you mean, like many names? Explain.
And former FBI Director James Comey, and former CIA Director John Brennan, and former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. They were all terrible. They lied to Congress, the president added. He spied on my campaign. That's treason, he continued. Whatever, it goes on. A bunch of crap. I mean, we've heard it in one form or another. It's desperate at this point, man, but I guess it's working to continue to raise money from some of the 73 million people who still think that he's a good idea.
Jim is absolutely right. It's been, I saw a figure on my email earlier today, over $200 million raised by Donald Trump for his political action committee or whatever. Now in Michigan, we've seen those nonprofit PACs be donated to by big wealthy donors, and then as lawmakers retire, they just get to suck off that PAC money for a couple of years as it slowly just gets given to them over time. But if Mike's correct, and there's still a debt due to some sweaty, very large men, he still has a need to get another couple hundred million out of us.
Couple hundred million, yes.
I will tell you for sure, I've received numerous emails every single day begging me for money for Donald Trump because somebody put the Michigan NORML board on a bad list for the Trump thing, and now I get every single thing. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. And they have 11 times matching. So if you give 5, it's like $55. So 11 times matching, and they still can't raise enough money. I mean, that's...
Yeah.
I mean, he's raising as much money after the campaign as he did.
Still can't raise enough money to lose this election.
And did, hopefully. Yeah.
I don't know. I think the way that we do elections in the United States of America needs some serious rethink. I know it's not a very popular way, but I'd like to see every candidate that hits a certain qualification be given a certain allocation of government money and not be allowed to use cash from any other source. I think that they should all be given a fair and equal amount of resources, and then they should have to sell themselves up on their skills and their merits, as opposed to who can spend the most in different markets. I think it's crazy mad that the guy who gets the most bucks ends up being the president simply because they can out media the better qualified guy. Ryan, you were going to say something. I saw you leaning forward there.
Oh no, no, I was laughing at some stuff. I was messaging Jamie about something. You caught me off guard there.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Important stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, well, guys, I mean, it's been a good conversation. I think we're pretty much done talking about the MORE Act, right? Is there anything else we wanted to cover on tonight's broadcast of Jazz Cabbage Cafe?
No, I think in summary, come back at it next session and reduce the tax amount and make sure they don't try to stop people who've had a history with cannabis from participating in the industry.
Yep. I would like to see some more in-depth analysis by learned professionals on what the individual provisions of this act do and which ones might be best for us to maybe emulate in Michigan law too. I'd like to take some of the ideas from the MORE Act and maybe transfer them into this potential change for the MRA, and maybe we can update our laws to include something like that. Certainly the Marijuana Regulatory Agency seems to want to throw some extra stuff in on this one, so why not?
Cannabis still remains irrationally sitting on the state's controlled substances list.
Makes no sense.
Complete contradiction to existing law, new law.
Right. Yep. Respect government, but by the way, government embraces a lie and they won't change. So, that's how it goes. I'm going to let Brad in, but we're just about to head on out. Mike, why don't we do a shameless plug section for you here? Tell us about 420 Post as we're on our way out.
Okay, 420 Post is Wednesdays from 1 to 2. My co-host, of course, are you and Jamie Cooper. And then we have a variety of guests. And next Wednesday, the 9th, we're going to have Andrew Brisboe on with us. And I think what we're talking about tonight, we can throw some of these questions at him. It'd be kind of interesting to hear his take on some of this, don't you think?
I do, yep.
And,
now,
go ahead. It's on Facebook, on the 420 Post. It's Facebook/420 Post, 420 spelled out. And I just mentioned to Rick that I looked at the stats from Wednesday's show, and we already had 1,300 views. So not bad for about 2 days, so.
Doing great. Talk about iHemp real quick.
Yeah, I work with the iHemp Association. I talked them into producing a show, which we do on Thursdays from noon to 1. And it's really a hands-on manual if you really want to get into the hemp industry. And me being a city boy living in Ann Arbor, now that I've discovered how hard and how expensive that is, I don't want any part of that. But I mean, if y'all are into farming, then but it's so. I mean, the farmer doesn't have to worry about whether his corn crop's going to go hot or his wheat crop's going to go hot. But that's really the wild card right now and they're hoping that the DEA will allow them to push it up to at least 1% to give them a little wiggle room there, right?
Right.
And so that's one of the things they're going to be lobbying for real hard here in the new administration. And good group, and I got about 500 members, and a lot of farmers around the state are looking at adding hemp as another crop to their mix, and it's like organic farming. It's more complicated than it looks like from the outside. So it's a great show. I've learned a tremendous amount this year.
And what was the time on that? Thursdays at 1 o'clock?
Thursdays from noon to 1 on Facebook. It goes out on Facebook on the iHemp page. And then we promote it as well from my various publications, Michigan Marijuana Report. And my main publication is MI Tech News. I'm an old tech reporter. And I must admit, for the last 50 years or so, I've been doing something on the side that's been illegal, but now it's not. So I can come out of the closet, as it were. Not that kind of closet, but yeah. So I mean, that's kind of cool. I've had a lot of friends for a long time that have been involved in the commodity business and that, so they're happy about it too.
Well, Brian Baser, looks like something just came out of your closet behind you, but you also have a podcast as well, the Smoke and Rope. Talk about that real quick.
Yeah, so you guys are on at noon with Brisboe, Smoking Rope podcast. We'll go Facebook Live at 1 right after you with Andrew Brisboe. So if you got a podcast out there and he's making the rounds next week, give him a call. But you can find it on Spotify and iTunes every Thursday, and we're just finished our 21st episode, 21 straight weeks. So Rick and Jamie have both been guests so far. So there's that, and then Redemption Foundation, Redemption Cannabis, and Hash Lovers of America. I want to give a shout out to.
Nice.
Hash Lovers of America. Hey, Jim Salane, what do you got going on? You and Colin do Decriminalize Nature and all those other things?
Yeah, we do. And shout out to Hash Lovers too. I'm a hash lover myself.
Oh yeah.
We're going to be doing a podcast for Entheogens that's coming up on December 18th. It's going to be on a Friday. That's from 4 to 6:30. It's going to be Decriminalize Nature, basically sponsored with Michigan Psychedelic Society. We're all going to be included in that with Colin and Julie and Mike, and it's going to be great. We're going to get guests on there and hopefully get some of you guys on there too. Would be great.
And that's December 18th, you said?
December 18th, yeah, 4 o'clock.
Fantastic. All right. Colin, anything to add?
No, that's my news that I wanted to share too. So that's pretty cool.
Jim, stole your thunder.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, we're a team.
Mr. Forrester, board member of Michigan NORML, what can you tell our listeners about?
Well, it seems like cannabis reforms are really starting to sweep the world. I mean, we've got Mexico looking at legalizing. We've got the United Nations with their big announcement, and I'm still not sure what that was all about. But cannabis reforms are happening, man. We're watching them, and it is exciting. It's exciting time to be involved in this. I've been here over 10 years, and a lot of you guys 10 years and more. It's remarkable to see what we're seeing and to live through it, to be part of this history, to be, somebody who's involved in the process of creating this new paradigm here in the United States and across the world. So I'm damn excited. I'm not as active as I once was. I have, family obligations and other things that really take precedent in my life right now over my advocacy, but I still give a damn, and I still chime in occasionally, and I still care, and I see the movement just get bigger all the time. So, I'm happy. Even in 2020, we had a few good things happen.
We did. Jamie, Lowell, you have anything to add before I wrap it up?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll just remind people, Medical Mondays, 9 to 11, or YouTube and Facebook and other stuff, and our regular broadcast of Jazz Cabbage Cafes on Tuesdays, 4 to 6, and there is Planet Green Trees, 8 o'clock on Thursdays. All these are on like YouTube and Facebook and stuff like that. And as a reminder, as we get closer, the next botanical company in Lansing is scheduled to open around December 15th. We definitely more word out on that, but that's getting very close and getting very exciting, and looking forward to that.
I'd like to announce, of course, that on December 6th, it'll be the 2-year anniversary of the rollout of personal freedoms from legalization. Michigan NORML will be hosting a Zoom call, much like this one here, and that'll be featured on our Facebook page for NORML, NORML of Michigan. All of you are, of course, invited to attend and talk to us about that. Jazz Cabbage Cafe is a pretty important podcast, but let me just point out to you, we got Jamie from Detroit, we got Brad from Northern Michigan, Ryan's from the Lansing area, I'm Flint, Colin, Western Wayne County, Mike and Jim from the Ann Arbor area. We're talking about a whole bunch of people from different areas of the state, all of the same mind when it comes to cannabis. We're not the only ones that are like that. More people believe the way that we believe than don't believe the way we believe. And we once knew that science was on our side, and we used that as our shield. Now that we know the public's on our side, And that's an even better shield. So we can continue to move forward feeling comfortable that we have the support of those people that surround us. Even if they don't always speak it, they speak it with their votes. So
Amen.
thanks everybody for being a part of this tonight. It was fun, and thanks for responding so quickly to this kind of a special breaking news thing. Mike Brennan, good job with that 420 post earlier today. That was great. Good job.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm learning to edit video as an old news guy, you know, so.
Yeah, we put out a nice 7-minute update for everybody on a video update on the MORE Act passage, and that helped to inspire us to do this evening as well. So thanks to all of our watchers.
Thanks, everyone.
We will see you
Thanks,
on Jazz
guys.
Cabbage on Tuesday at 4 p.m.
Thanks for
Thanks,
inviting me. It was fun.
guys.
All right. Take care.